Hey guys, and welcome to Willow's Southwest Studio. So this video is going to be a little bit different than the usual. I'm going to be answering some of the top questions that you've been asking me about my reduction firing experiments. If you watched my video last week that I released, that was a reduction firing I did back in October, I believe it was. I did 2 firings that day. It was so much fun. Unfortunately, I was only able to film one of those before my camera battery died, and the results varied. I had some really awesome results in the first firing. The second firing was a disaster, and it's been kind of hit or miss with me with these experiments. So I think I picked out 6 of the topmost questions you guys been asking me, and I'm hoping to answer those all in this video. So let's get right to it. And question number 1, what is your favorite type of pottery to replicate, Will? That's a bit of a tough one. When I first started doing pottery, I had hoped I'd be able to replicate Hohokam pottery. I just love that style, those reds, the beautiful beige colors. Unfortunately, to this day, I still have not been able to find a good workable clay that's easy to access and it's in abundance. I did find one clay that I did in a challenge for Andy Ward's channel a year ago, making that one with all the little burden basket carriers. But that clay, after about, I don't know, maybe 24 hours, starts to just reek. It's like the worst smelling clay I've ever worked with. Really good clay to work with though, but oh man, let me tell you. And the clay itself is embedded in a bunch of sand. So about 90% of what I'm digging out of the ground is sand, and I have 10% yield of actual clay that I can use. So I can fill up a huge bag, and I've only got a small amount to work with. It's just not something that's really practical, unfortunately. So fortunately, Hohokam has just been shoved on the back burner, and it probably always will be for me. The next type of pottery I really like is Salado style. Those beautiful reds, the whites, and the blacks. Oh boy. Unfortunately, it is such a challenge to work with. Not only finding that nice smectite clay that your organic paint's going to adhere to when it's fired, but just the whole process of painting the white on first, the red, burnishing it in, then getting the mesquite paint painted on, and then hoping that everything's going to survive in the firing. There is a lot of elements and variables involved in Salado firing, and oh my goodness, guys, you guys that actually do that stuff, I'm definitely inspired by you every time I see a Salado jar that's been replicated. But it's definitely not my go-to pottery, unfortunately. And I really love the Sholo pottery style. That is some beautiful stuff. I've dabbled with it a little bit. I have not been able to find that nice orange clay that fires to that beautiful orange, and getting that white lines to stick onto the paint. Mine always peels off. It's always some kind of disaster. So, oh boy. But I love Sanawa pottery, and you can't go wrong with that. There's no designs, no crazy decorations. So that's definitely my go-to pottery that I love doing. But I'm gonna have to say my personal favorite go-to pottery that I just love doing is Cibola whiteware. Those beautiful blacks, if you can get them black, and those beautiful whites, if you can get them white. There's such a challenge to it. It's not as crazy as the Salado style where you have to get all these elements working, but there's still enough challenge, especially when it comes to making those blacks, a beautiful jet black. So question number 2, Will, do you use cover sherds for your reduction firings? And the answer to that, if you've been watching any of my videos, guys, is a definite yes. I've struggled with the reduction firings in those cover sherds because I always get a lot of carbon, and the carbon's usually from the cover sherds. But over recent experiments, I figured out all I need to do to compensate for that is to just have a very long firing. The longer the firing, the more that time the carbon gets to burn out and things come out super clean. So cover sherds is no longer an issue for me. That's my huge tip for you guys. If you're struggling with that carbon stuff, just increase the time on your firing. The longer it goes, the more things burn out. If you have a fire that's going over an hour, that's usually a good thing. I wouldn't recommend anything under 40 minutes for a firing of any type of Cibola whiteware for this type of stuff if you want something to come out really nice and clean. For the cover sherds, boy, I'm always finding myself making new cover sherds. That's one of the crazy things about this particular style of pottery. When you smother this stuff, those cover sherds go into a state of shock. They're probably at 500 degrees Celsius, and all of a sudden you're dumping some cool 60-degree dirt on them, and it just sends them to shock. Instant cool down. They always get real brittle, start to break. So I always find myself making new cover sherds, but it's a definite must. If you don't use cover sherds, when you bury it, and I've done a couple videos, I don't think I've released some of them, doing some experience where I've covered half of a jar with cover sherds and the other half, you'll get all this dirt that comes directly onto the pot surface. And if there's any organic material in that, it's going to create little carbon spots right away, and it's just going to really make an interesting pattern, but it's probably not going to be the most desirable patterns. So cover sherds are a definite must for me. So question number 3. What type of clay do you use for your reduction fires? And do you use a smectite clay for that white slip? I do not use a smectite white clay. I save that for all my Salado stuff. It's a bit of a rare clay for me, a little bit more challenging to find, and the stuff that's out there is way out there, and I don't have access to it, unfortunately. So I have a clay that I do have access to, which is a white clay. Doesn't hold organic paint at all, and it works out perfect. Under an oxidization fire, it fires to this creamy orange color, but when it's reduced, it comes out to be this beautiful white color. It's just absolutely beautiful, and it's perfect for reduction firings. It's easy for me to access, and there's a bit of an abundance for it. I can't sculpt with it, unfortunately, and it's only good for a slip, but it just works out perfect for this type of pottery that I do with the Cibola stuff. And question number 4, what temperature do I usually smother at? This is a bit of a tricky question because it's something I'm still experimenting with. Usually I smother in the upper 500s or just the very low 600s. I usually smother below 610 and 580, and I believe those produce some of the most beautiful blacks that I've ever achieved. Unfortunately though, when I do that, I usually get some carbon building with it, where my clay turns more gray than white. Over the past few weeks, I've been experimenting around with the lower smothering in the very high 400s, maybe 480 to 490, to as high as 510 to 520, and I've gotten some of the most beautiful whites coming out, except for I've had a bit of a gamble where my blacks do not come out as black as I usually get when I smother at a higher temperature. And I also get some weird issues where when I smother, sometimes my cover sherds don't get fully reduced. So it's a bit of a mystery. I'm still experimenting around with that. I'm actually going to try and do my next firing where I'm kind of going for the Goldilocks, where it's not going to be close to 600 and not close to 500, but maybe in the 550s, just to see what kind of results I get from that and if it's any different from smothering at a lower temperature. But I definitely have the best results for whites when I smother at a lower temperature in those upper 400s. And question number 5, how do I smother my fires? It's a really simple process, guys. I usually have a little bit of a mound of dirt on standby, so when it does come time to smother, I just dig from that. I don't want to be scrambling and trying, I got to get some dirt somewhere. That happened to me in my experiment I did 2 weeks ago, where I thought I had enough dirt, and I'm like, yikes, I don't have enough dirt, and I'm on the clock. And you have a very fine window of when you have to be able to smother that pot out. Otherwise, you might as well just start from scratch and it's game over from there. So definitely it's a must to have some dirt on standby, and you've got your pit and you just want to start shoveling that in as quick as possible. You don't have to be too crazy quick, but just quick enough, because if you go too quick, sometimes what happens is, and this has happened to me a couple times, some of my pots, they're upside down, wham, the dirt hits here, and then your pot just goes like that, and your whole cover sherd complex knocks over, and it's like, oh no, what in the world just happened? So definitely still take your time, but you don't want it to be too slow where it's like, uh-oh. The more you do it, you kind of get a visual eye of what's going on. Like I'll notice that little pockets are starting to develop where air is being reintroduced, and usually when it comes time to bury it out where that little pocket developed, sure enough, I've got some maroon in that spot, in that area, or I've got some red in the worst case scenario. But as for the smothering part, again, it's just dumping a bunch of dirt directly over the pot. If you've got your cover sherd set up correctly with enough coverage to prevent the dirt from getting onto the pot, you're going to be golden with that. Question number 6, what kind of wood do you use for the reduction firings? And this is something I've experimented around with quite a bit. I've used all kinds of wood, from pinyon wood, mesquite wood, palo verde wood, to junk scrap wood from the lumber yard, which is usually pine, or a mixture of some other crazy woods. I've even used some cholla wood, which burns really hot and fast. I found it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter as long as that carbon gets burned out and you hit a certain temperature, which is probably anywhere from 780 to 820 in that range. I think that's the most ideal range for the pottery that I do. Again, it depends on your clay too. Some clays need to be fired hotter than others, but that's a whole another topic. But for the most part, I don't think the wood really matters at all. I do not use mesquite wood anymore. I save that for the salato stuff that I do. I've almost deforested the area that I fire in with the mesquite wood, so it's really skimpy now for me, and I definitely only save it for my salato stuff. But I do have an abundance of Palo Verde, and sometimes I'll just be using that. If I fire at my grandfather's house, well, then I'll just be using, like some store-bought wood or something like that, which is just basically firewood that you would get at a local hardware store or grocery store. And the last question, kind of a strange one for me, but I get asked it quite a bit. Do you remove those coals from the fire before you smother? The answer to that is I just leave it as is. I don't think the Native Americans removed anything. I guess you could with a stick. I just leave everything as is. You kind of want those coals in there because the coals that are still burning are actually what's removing any oxygen that you may reintroduce into the fire. The whole goal of a reduction firing is to remove the oxygen. So as your fire starts to go out, you're going to be smothering the coals. They're going to be starving for oxygen. They're just going to be pulling in whatever oxygen is still left in that environment. That's another reason why I think the cover sherds are kind of important, because it provides that area where you have the air to keep the fire going just a little bit. Even though you've got dirt on it, it doesn't last very long, but it's enough to hopefully pull out any remaining oxygen in there. So that's why I think you definitely want to leave those coals in there. You don't want to remove them. There's a chance that some of those coals could hit your pottery and could cause some carbon, but I think at that point they're so purified that it's not even going to really bother. It maybe leave like a clean fire cloud, but it's not going to be anything too crazy. Nothing to be too concerned about. All right, my friends. So thanks so much for asking all these questions. If you have more questions, leave a comment below. I'll do another video like this if it's something that's you guys think has been pretty beneficial to you guys. I had a lot of fun making it. Give you guys a chance to get a little bit more in depth into the process that I go through with this. Sometimes it's so hard to cram a lot of information in just 10 minutes. I like to keep my videos about 10 minutes. So I skip over things, I glance over things, and people are like, oh man, Will, I wish you had shown this or done this a little bit differently. So if you have any questions or any other suggestions, definitely leave a comment below, guys. I read all of your comments and I love to respond to them. And I just want to thank you so much. I just love my community. With the pottery, you guys are so awesome and so generous too. I've had some people send me some clay samples to test out. And Mark, I still have not had a chance to play around with your clay yet. I've got to do that. I need some time to set aside. So thank you so much for that. And thank you for all of the other support you guys have given me. It just really means a lot to me, guys. And just such a special and beautiful community we have with this pottery stuff. So thanks again. And I really hope you guys learned something from this video. If you did, please be sure to give it a like or consider hitting that subscribe button and helping this channel grow. All right, my friends, till next time.